Hi, Carmen, Mary, and Cindy. I wanted to touch base with you on Module 3 discussion board and talk about my interviews and how they related to my literature review and my conceptual framework. So I'm going to start off with the interviews. I was able to interview 5 underprepared students. To ensure that they were underprepared, I asked each of the students who were interested in participating in the study if they were either currently taking a developmental course or if they had taken one previously as part of their program of study. Every single participant had actually the need to take more than one developmental course, so they all met the criteria, and I was able to proceed with the interviews. Some of the common threads that I found was that all of the students seemed to have mentioned that it was going to be determination and commitment. They all mentioned things like stick to itness, if there's such a word. So I found that very interesting. Several of the students who came to college as a non-traditional student who had been in the workforce first or the military first also seemed to look at college like they looked at work or the military, so more of like a job as far as their attendance and turning in their assignments. They really looked at it with their work ethic, through their work ethic lens. So I also found that very interesting. 4 out of 5 of the students also just purely lamented over math issues. So that was a very, very common thread. And the 5th student who didn't lament over math issues hadn't begun their developmental math work yet, or else maybe they might have lamented as well. They were busy lamenting over the one course that they had that was developmental ed at the time, which was the English course. The other 4, though, who were lamenting over math, by the way, I found it very, very interesting that out of them, 3 of them also had to take developmental English or reading, and they never mentioned the English or reading at all. They only mentioned the math. So that stood out to me. Also, just this was kind of an aside that really didn't have to do with the developmental education and the underpreparedness, but that the student population that came willing to take the interviews was a lot more diverse than I was expecting it to be. So that was very interesting as to me as well. In fact, one of my interviews was with a student that we had to have an interpreter because he spoke sign language and I did not. So I was just really, I enjoyed that aspect of the fact that I was able to have a more diverse population than I was expecting. So a variety of ages and everything else too. So that was a very nice plus for me. Tying my common threads that I saw to my literature review and going back and reflecting on my literature review after I went back and revisited my interviews. 3 key things stood out in my literature review, so I wanted to tie those to the interviews. The first one was from Conley, from a piece in 2008 where Conley identified 4 key facets of college readiness. The first being cognitive strategies, the second, content knowledge, the third, academic behaviors, and the fourth, contextual skills and knowledge. And you'll kind of notice those are very heavy in the cognitive area of development. And I must say that I really didn't pick up very much at all from the students I interviewed any of these things. I mean, this was not what they talked about much, wasn't where their focus was. And so even though in my literature review I found that to be kind of important and it was cited in a couple of other articles, Conley's work, it just, those kind of things were not what I was hearing from the students. So moving to the second one, which was based partially off of Conley, by the way. Arnold and colleagues in 2012 came up with 5 key elements of college readiness: self-efficacy, motivation, academic skills and discipline, aspirations, and college knowledge. And now these ones you may notice are not entirely cognitive, but they also have elements of social emotional development in there as well. These will go together to Arnold and colleagues formed one of the frameworks that I use in my out of the 3 frameworks that I used for the framework analysis that we did. So that may sound familiar in a minute when we go through the frameworks, but some of this did sound more related to what I would hear from the interviews, that self-efficacy and the motivation and the aspiration and being disciplined. So that did seem to ring true. And the college knowledge, some of the things that they didn't seem to know, that also seemed to ring true as well. Which goes to the third piece, which was this was kind of more of a compilation. It wasn't just from one given article of my literature review. From the literature review, though, we came up with a list of reasons why students may be underprepared for college, reasons such as being a first-generation college student, ESL, race, class, family income, and lack of understanding. And throughout this list, the students that I interviewed fell into almost all of these categories, one or the other, and not that they were all of these things, but definitely had students who mentioned being first generation college, definitely had ESL students, had a variety of races, a variety of classes, a variety of incomes. Several of them mentioned income as truly being a stumbling block for them. And lack of understanding really, really rang true to me. Not that they mentioned lack of understanding, that's why it rang so true. When we would do the biographical information sheet, it was surprising to me how many of the terms I would define for them. Even after defining them, how hard of a time they would have answering questions on that sheet. And then as I would ask questions as part of the interview, I would realize that some of the things they wrote on that sheet and then the answers in the interview conflicted each other. Just for example, family income. They would put, when I would say socioeconomic status, do you consider yourself like lower income, middle income, high income? And they would put different things down. And then when in the course of the interview, they might talk about financial struggles, and maybe something that they would disclose there would clearly tip a hand that would say that they're probably most likely low income, but maybe they were middle income when they were there. So lack of knowledge and lack of understanding on some of those types of things was just very insightful, and kind of goes back to college knowledge as well. I figure if there's a lacking there, there's more than likely a lacking on the college knowledge side as well. So, and some of their complaints as far as their classes and when they were complaining about math in particular, and the way things are structured and the way things are done, and it was clear that there was definitely some lack of understanding. So, anyways, the literature review really helped me go back and reflect to the interview, so that was very, very helpful. So then moving on to the frameworks. The first framework that I looked at was Social Cognitive Theory by Bandura, and all of the participants spoke of their goals and sticking with it, and this begins to show evidence of Bandura's intentionality and forethought. And then all but one of the participants displayed self-reflectiveness, self-reactiveness, and self-efficacy. And this theory advocates modeling, and 4 out of the 5 students basically asked for more modeling in their developmental math courses. They, of course, didn't use the word modeling, but basically that was almost exactly what they asked for. So I found that very, very interesting. Now, I'm going to talk about this more in a minute, but 3 of the students pure said outright that they weren't interested in socializing with other students. But several of them did talk about how they appreciated the social interaction that they had with advisors or teachers outside of class time if a teacher was willing to give them extra help in any way, shape, or form, or like a formal, some form of tutoring or something outside of class. So that kind of socialization, which is part of the social cognitive theory as far as Bandura is concerned, that was perceived in a positive manner. So that aspect of the social cognitive theory, I think, would go fine with this particular group of students that I interviewed. So the second framework that I looked at was Tinto's social integration theory. And 3 out of 5 participants, as I already mentioned, they made it very clear that they were there to come to class and leave, and that they weren't interested at all in anything social. In fact, their facial expressions kind of showed what they thought of that. And they also, 4 out of 5 participants discussed the importance and or need to get or keep a good job, and that they may have easily found that those type of those external factors more beneficial than college, which is a big part of this theory. And additionally, 3 out of 5 mentioned heavy and strong family commitments, and that they may have had that as an external factor that was more beneficial than college. So I could see how this doesn't seem to easily fit the students that I interviewed. And again, 3 out of 5 said things that made me think that they didn't want to be integrated too much, almost making me think if they were pushed too hard, it would be a turnoff and it might push them away. So that really helped me put that particular theory into perspective, that it might be too heavy on the social side for these particular students that I looked at. The third and final framework that I used was the ecological view of college readiness, which was back from the literature review, the Arnold and colleagues from 2012. So it's a very contemporary theory. And all 5 participants have encountered challenging experiences, which is important in this theory because it says that it gives them the maturation and growth as they progress through this learning, through the college readiness cycle. So all 5 participants mentioned components of their microsystem, mesosystems, and ecosystems, and 3 out of 5 mentioned elements of their macrosystem in the interview. And one of the things that I really liked about this particular theory that made me use it as one of the 3 for my analysis of frameworks was that it talks about the forms of multiple demands. And I find that underprepared students, and especially ones that face all of those things that I mentioned earlier, first generation ESL, race, class, family, income, and lack of understanding, a lot of times those students face multiple demands. And that's a core component of this theory. And so all of the people that I interviewed mentioned multiple demands in one way or another. They were all very different multiple demands, but they did all mention a multiple demand scenario in one shape or form. And so that is part of this theory. So I did feel like this theory did kind of connect still with my participants, but I mentioned in my analysis that this theory is so new, it still seems like it needs a little bit more work yet. And so this and Bendor kind of spoke to mine, but not so much with Tinto's theory. And I really enjoyed this assignment because it really did help me reflect back and tie these 3 pieces together, and that was really useful and helpful for me. And I can't wait to watch your videos and watch you all tie yours together as well. Thank you for watching mine.